My daughter looked me in the eye across the kitchen table and said, "Mom, it's time you found something smaller, something more manageable for a woman living alone." I smiled, told her I'd think about it, and started making phone calls the very next morning. 6 weeks later, I was standing on a sun-drenched terrace in Lisbon, Portugal, watching the Tagus River shimmer in the afternoon light, while my daughter was learning for the very first time that the house she'd been quietly redecorating in her mind had just sold to a young family from Ohio for $487,000. I'm so glad you're here. Stay with me until the end of this story, and drop the city you're watching from in the comments. I'd love to know where you are tonight. My name is Margaret Louise Calloway, though everyone who has ever loved me calls me Maggie. I am 71 years old, and until about 8 months ago, I lived in the same Cape Cod house in Asheville, North Carolina, that my late husband Gerald and I bought the year our daughter was born. We paid $74,000 for it in 1984. We painted every room ourselves, replaced the roof twice, built a sunroom off the back that Gerald designed on a legal pad one rainy Sunday afternoon, and planted a Japanese maple in the front yard that is now taller than the house itself. I raised my daughter Claire in that house. I learned to bake sourdough in that kitchen. I said goodbye to Gerald in that bedroom when he passed from pancreatic cancer 3.5 years ago, 11 months after his diagnosis, surrounded by the smell of the pine trees we'd always loved. After Gerald died, the silence in that house was the loudest thing I had ever heard. Claire flew in from Denver for the funeral and stayed 2 weeks. Her husband, a man named Preston who works in corporate real estate and has never once asked me a question about my own life that wasn't followed immediately by a pivot to talking about himself, stayed 4 days before flying back for what he described as an unmovable client meeting. I appreciated Claire's presence more than I could say. She grieved genuinely. She and Gerald had been close in the way that fathers and daughters sometimes are, built on shared jokes and Saturday morning pancakes and a mutual love of old westerns that I never quite understood. When she left, I stood in the driveway watching her rental car disappear around the corner and thought, this is it now. This is the shape of my life going forward. For a year, I managed. I kept teaching my watercolor classes at the Community Arts Center on Tuesday and Thursday evenings. I tended the garden. I had coffee every week with my neighbor Dolores, who had been widowed 7 years earlier and assured me that the second year was somehow harder than the first, which I did not want to hear, but which turned out to be true. I read more books than I had in the previous decade. I learned to cook for one, which is its own quiet grief when you have spent 40 years cooking for two. Claire called every Sunday. Preston occasionally appeared in the background of our video calls, waving vaguely in my direction before disappearing to whatever room he preferred when his wife was talking to her mother. I understood that he found me, if not actively unpleasant, then at least inconvenient. I was the reason Claire flew back to North Carolina 4 times a year. I was the reason she worried. I was, in his efficient corporate vocabulary, a liability. 18 months after Gerald's funeral, Claire called on a Wednesday, which was unusual. We don't talk on Wednesdays. I knew before I answered that the call meant something different. "Mom," she said, "Preston and I have been talking. We think it might make more sense for us to move to Asheville." I felt something warm and hopeful rise in my chest. My daughter, coming home. I told her I thought that was a wonderful idea. Asheville had grown considerably since she left for college. Good restaurants, an art scene, mountains. Preston could work remotely. He'd been doing it since 2020. "The house has so much space," I said. "You could take the whole upstairs. We'd have the sunroom between us." There was a brief pause on her end that I should have read more carefully. "Actually, Mom, Preston thinks it might work better the other way around. We'd take the main floor, since it's more functional for entertaining. You could have the upstairs, and we'd eventually convert the sunroom into his home office. Gerald's sunroom, the one he designed on that legal pad." I told her that sounded fine, because I wanted my daughter close, because the house was enormous for one person, because I told myself that accommodation was just another word for love. They moved in on a Thursday in March, arriving with a moving truck that I had not expected to be quite so large. Preston had apparently arranged for a significant portion of their Denver furniture to come with them, including a leather sectional sofa that was objectively too large for the living room, but which Preston referred to as a statement piece, with the tone of a man who does not expect to be disagreed with. My own sofa, a comfortable floral piece that Gerald and I had picked out together at an estate sale 20 years ago, was moved to the garage. Temporarily, Claire assured me, until we figure out the flow of the space. The first month was an adjustment, which is the most generous possible word for what it actually was. Preston used the kitchen as though it belonged to him entirely, which technically it did not, but which he behaved as though it did. He kept reorganizing the cabinets for efficiency, a word he used constantly, and which appeared to mean whatever arrangement suited him personally. My cast iron skillets, which I have owned for 30 years, and which are seasoned to a depth of color that suggests they have their own memories, were relocated to the highest shelf on the grounds that they were rarely used. I used them 3 times a week. I just stopped telling him that and used a step stool. Claire was gentler about it. She was trying to build a life with her husband in a new city, and I understood that. She was also, I gradually recognized, managing him constantly, softening his edges for my benefit, explaining him to me in the language of someone who has learned to translate a foreign personality for people who didn't grow up speaking it. Mom, he doesn't mean it the way it sounds. Mom, he's just particular about spaces. Mom, you know how he is. I knew how he was. That was precisely the issue. 4 months after they moved in, Claire asked me to have coffee with her on a Saturday morning. Just the 2 of us, which should have told me something, since we were rarely just the 2 of us anymore. Preston had taken up what seemed to be a permanent position in my sunroom, or his home office, which is what we were all now calling it, treating the glass walls Gerald had loved for the way they brought the garden inside as a backdrop for his video calls with clients. Claire poured the coffee herself, which was another signal I missed. Mom, she said, I want to talk about something, and I need you to hear me out before you respond. I told her, of course. She had clearly rehearsed what came next. I could hear it in the cadence, the careful sequencing of points. She and Preston had been talking about their future, about starting a family, which was genuinely wonderful news and which I told her immediately, before she could get to whatever came after it. She smiled briefly and continued. With a baby coming, they would need more space. The upstairs configuration wasn't practical for a nursery. Preston had looked into adding onto the house, but the lot restrictions in the neighborhood were complicated, and the cost was prohibitive given current interest rates. She looked at her coffee mug. We've been thinking that it might make more sense, she said, for you to find your own place. Something smaller. Just for you. An apartment, or maybe one of those nice communities over in West Asheville where a lot of active seniors are living now. You'd have your own space, your own independence, and we'd be right here if you ever needed anything. There it was, my own space, my own independence, as though she were offering me something rather than taking it. I asked her to tell me more about what she had in mind. She named a place called Harmony Ridge. She had already toured it, which meant this conversation had been planned long enough in advance that she had driven across town to evaluate the facility before informing me that I was being relocated to it. Harmony Ridge had a watercolor studio, which she mentioned with the specific intention of softening the blow. It had a dining room with 2 seating times, and a calendar of organized activities, and what the brochure apparently called a vibrant community of active adults. I asked her what she thought I should do with my belongings. Oh, we'd help you sort through everything, she said. The apartment over there is furnished, so you wouldn't need to bring much. Some personal things, your art supplies, your books, we'd help you figure out what to keep. I looked at her across the table, this daughter I had loved for 43 years, who had been born in the hospital 3 blocks from this house, who had learned to walk in this kitchen holding onto the cabinet handles that I still touched every morning without thinking about it. I looked at her and I understood something I had been avoiding understanding for months. She was a good person. She was not a bad daughter, but she had married a man who saw every situation as a resource allocation problem. And she had been living inside his logic for long enough that she had started using it herself without noticing. I told her I would think about it seriously. She looked relieved. That's all I'm asking, Mom. Just be open to it. Change can be a good thing. Change can absolutely be a good thing. I agreed with her there. That afternoon, while Claire drove Preston to a client dinner and the house was quiet for the first time in 4 months, I sat in my upstairs bedroom with my laptop and a cup of tea and did not search for Harmony Ridge or West Asheville apartment listings or any of the things a woman in my position was apparently expected to search for. I searched instead for the current real estate market in Asheville, North Carolina, which told me that Cape Cod homes with sunrooms in established neighborhoods were selling within 11 days on average, frequently above asking price. Then I searched for the cost of living in Lisbon, Portugal, which Gerald and I had visited for 2 weeks on our 35th anniversary, and which I had never quite stopped thinking about since. Then I searched for his life insurance policy, which I knew the number of but had never permitted myself to think of as a resource I might use for my own happiness, because it had always felt like the wrong kind of spending. Gerald's death money, I thought of it privately, with all the guilt that phrase implied, but it was not Gerald's death money. It was Gerald's love for me, expressed in the form of careful financial planning over 40 years of marriage. He had known, I think, somewhere in the part of him that was practical and protective and always thinking 3 steps ahead, that he might go before me. He had made sure I would be all right. I had not been letting myself be all right. By evening, I had a different kind of clarity than I'd had that morning. Not anger. Not yet. Something quieter. Something that felt, surprisingly, like the beginning of a plan. The next morning I called my attorney, a woman named Barbara Finch, who had handled Gerald's estate and who I trusted entirely. I explained the situation calmly and asked her to confirm what I already believed to be true, which was that the house was mine, solely and entirely, my name on the deed, no transfer, no complication, no gray area. Barbara confirmed it in under 4 minutes. The house is yours, Maggie. Has been since you and Gerald bought it. You can sell it tomorrow if you want to. I told her I was thinking about selling it in the next 30 days if possible. There was a brief silence. Are you all right? I told her I had never felt more clear-headed in years. Then I called a real estate agent named James Whitfield, who had sold 2 houses on my street in the past 18 months, and whose signs I had watched go up and come down with the efficient rhythm of someone who knew exactly what he was doing. He came to see the house that same afternoon. He walked through every room with the focused attention of a man cataloging value, stopping at the sunroom, touching the custom window frames, looking out at the Japanese maple in the front yard with genuine appreciation. This is exceptional, he said. You've maintained everything beautifully. The sunroom alone will attract buyers who wouldn't otherwise look at this square footage. What's prompting the sale, if you don't mind my asking? I'm relocating internationally, I told him. He looked up. Wonderful. Where to? Lisbon. He smiled. I have a colleague who moved to Porto 2 years ago. She says the light there is unlike anything she's ever seen. James estimated the house would sell between $470,000 and $500,000. He thought we'd have multiple offers in the first week. I told him I wanted to list by Friday. He said he'd have the paperwork ready by Thursday morning. After he left, I sat in Gerald's sunroom, the one Preston was now calling his office, and looked out at the garden, where the hydrangeas I'd planted the summer after Gerald was diagnosed were just starting their second bloom of the season. I thought about all the things this house had held. The weight of it, the beauty of it, the grief of it. Then I thought about Lisbon. The yellow trams, the tiles on every building face, blue and white and intricate, like stories told in ceramic. The bread, the way the evening light falls on the river. The cafe where Gerald and I had sat for 3 hours on a Tuesday afternoon just talking. The way we had stopped doing at home because home was always full of smaller urgencies. I was ready. That evening, Claire made dinner, a pasta dish she'd been perfecting since her 20s, and the 3 of us sat at the kitchen table that had belonged to my mother before me. Preston talked about a deal he was working on in Phoenix. Claire talked about her first prenatal appointment, which was the following week, and which I promised I would come to if she wanted me there. She said she did. I believed her. "How's the apartment search going?" Preston asked, with the tone of a man checking a task off a list. "Very well," I said. "I should have news soon." "Good. Claire and I appreciate you being so understanding about all of this, Maggie. It means a lot." He called me Maggie, which he had never done before that evening and which landed strangely, like a costume he had put on for the occasion. I told him understanding was the very least I could offer. I did not sleep much that night. Not from anxiety, but from the particular alertness that comes when your life is about to change shape. And some part of you wants to be fully present for every moment leading up to it. I lay in the bedroom where Gerald had died, and I thought about what he would say about all of this. He would not be angry. Gerald was not a man who spent much time on anger. He would probably laugh, that low private laugh he saved for situations that were both terrible and absurd, and then he would say, "Well, Maggie, I guess we finally get that place in Portugal." On Thursday morning, while Claire was at a prenatal yoga class, and Preston was on a call in the sunroom with the door closed, James Whitfield came to my door with the listing agreement. We sat at the kitchen table. I signed it with the fountain pen Gerald had given me for my 60th birthday. James shook my hand and said he would have professional photographs taken the following morning, and the listing would go live Friday afternoon. By Saturday, we had 4 inquiries. By Monday, we had 2 offers. I had not told Claire. I want to be precise about this, because I have thought about it many times since. I was not trying to wound my daughter. I was not staging an elaborate revenge. I was a 71-year-old woman who owned her home outright, who had been asked to vacate it with the same casual efficiency with which Preston reorganized my kitchen cabinets, and who had decided, perhaps for the first time in her adult life, to move first and explain later. There was something in me that needed to do this one thing entirely alone, without consultation, without her management of Preston's reaction, or his management of the situation, or anyone else's logic applied to a decision that was, in the most fundamental sense, mine. James called me Wednesday afternoon. "Maggie, we have a strong cash offer. Family from Ohio, 2 young children. They loved the sunroom. They want to close in 21 days. I accepted it." Claire came home from work that evening to find me on the back porch, drinking a glass of iced tea and reading a book about Lisbon's Alfama district, which is the oldest neighborhood in the city, built on a hillside above the river, full of narrow streets and fado music and cats that belong to everyone and no one. "What's that?" she asked, nodding at the book. "Research," I said. She sat down across from me. I could see her reading my face the way daughters learn to read their mothers' faces over decades of close attention. Something shifted in her expression. "Mom." I told her everything then, calmly, without drama, from the beginning, the call to Barbara, the call to James, the listing, the photographs, the offer from the family in Ohio, the 21-day closing, the apartment I had already put a deposit on in the Principe Real neighborhood of Lisbon, a 2-bedroom with tall windows and a small terrace overlooking a square where old men played chess on weekend mornings. She was quiet for a long time after I finished. "You sold the house," she said. "I'm selling the house," I said. "It closes in 3 weeks. Where am I supposed to?" She stopped herself. "Where are we supposed to go?" I thought about my answer carefully. I told her that she and Preston were intelligent, resourceful adults with good incomes and a real estate professional in the family, and that I had every confidence they would find a beautiful home for themselves and their baby. I told her there were several lovely neighborhoods in Asheville where homes were available in their price range. I told her that 21 days was in fact more notice than she had given me when she sat across this same table and told me to look into Harmony Ridge. She looked at me as though seeing something she had not noticed before, something that had always been there. "Mom, I know you didn't mean to hurt me," I said. "I genuinely believe that, but you did. And you made that decision with Preston before you ever asked me what I wanted. You planned around me without including me. and I realized that I had been letting people plan around me for quite a long time. She started crying then, real crying, not the strategic kind. I reached across and held her hand because she was my daughter and she was pregnant, and I loved her without reservation, even in the middle of all of this. I'm not angry at you, I told her. I want you to hear that. I'm not leaving because I'm angry. I'm leaving because I finally understand that I have one life, and Gerald's gone, and I can either spend the rest of it shrinking into whatever space other people decide is appropriate for a woman my age, or I can go live somewhere that makes me feel alive. I choose the second one. She wiped her face. Lisbon. Lisbon. Is it because of the trip? You and Dad? Partly, I said, but also because I have wanted to go back since the day we left, and I kept finding reasons not to, and then Gerald got sick, and then he died, and I ran out of reasons to keep waiting. Claire moved out with Preston 12 days later, into a short-term rental while they looked for a house, which they found within 6 weeks. It was a new construction in a neighborhood on the east side of town, with good schools and a community pool. Preston, to his credit, did not call me. Claire called me every few days, finding her footing in a conversation that had been reset to something more honest than what we'd had before. I closed on the Asheville house on a Tuesday afternoon in September, signing the final documents in Barbara's office with the same fountain pen I'd used to sign the listing agreement. The family from Ohio sent a handwritten note with the closing paperwork. They had 2 daughters, ages 4 and 7. They could not wait to see the Japanese maple in the fall. My plane landed in Lisbon on a Thursday morning. The sky, the particular shade of blue that seems to exist only over the Atlantic coast of southern Europe, the kind of blue that makes you feel that the world is larger and more generous than you had remembered. My apartment was on the 3rd floor of a 19th century building, with an elevator barely large enough for one person, and a great deal of optimism. The terrace looked over a square where, on that first morning, 3 old men were indeed playing chess, and a woman was hanging laundry from an upper window, and a yellow cat was sitting in a patch of sunlight on the cobblestones with the serene authority of someone who owns the entire block. I stood on that terrace with a cup of coffee and thought, Gerald, look at this. Look where we ended up. I spent the first month learning my neighborhood the way you learn a language, one word at a time. The bakery 2 streets over where the pastéis de nata were made fresh at 7 every morning. The tiny grocery run by a family who thought my Portuguese was charming, which is a diplomatic way of saying unintelligible. The Tuesday market where I bought vegetables and a set of hand-painted ceramic plates that I did not need and could not leave behind. The English language bookshop near the river where I found, to my deep pleasure, a Thursday evening book club populated by expats from 8 different countries, all of whom had arrived in Lisbon by some unexpected route, and none of whom seemed to think that 71 was too old for anything worth doing. I enrolled in a Portuguese language class. I started a new watercolor series of the tiles I saw everywhere, the azulejos, blue and white, and geometric and narrative, each one a small painting in its own right. I found a Fado club where I went on Friday evenings to sit alone at a small table with a glass of wine and listen to music that seemed to have been specifically composed for people who have loved deeply and lost and are still somehow here. Claire called me 6 weeks after I arrived, on a Sunday morning her time, which was mid-afternoon for me. I was on the terrace with my sketchbook. "How are you?" she asked. I told her honestly. Good days and lonely days. More good ones lately. "I owe you an apology," she said. A real one, not the kind where I explain myself after. I told her I was listening. She had been in therapy since they moved out of the house. Her therapist had helped her see something she had been avoiding, which was that she had spent years smoothing Preston's path through situations that should have required him to do his own smoothing, that she had translated him to me and me to him for so long that she had lost track of where she ended and the mediation began, that when she had told me to find my own place, she had been using his logic so thoroughly that she hadn't even noticed it wasn't her own. "I didn't ask what you wanted," she said. "I presented you with a solution and called it a conversation. That's exactly right, I said. And I want you to know that I understand how it happened. I'm not holding it against you, but I need you to understand something too. Of course, I am not the version of me you were expecting to manage. I am the version of me that your father knew, and that I knew before grief made me quiet. I'm finding her again here, and I need you to meet her with curiosity rather than concern. There was a long pause. Then she said, I'd like that. I'd really like that. She asked me what my days looked like. I told her about the tile paintings, the language class, the book club, the fado. She laughed at the image of me sitting alone in a club listening to Portuguese blues music. Not unkindly, but with genuine delight. The way she used to laugh as a child when I did something that surprised her. You sound like yourself, she said. Like the version of you from before. I told her that was exactly who I was trying to be. Claire and Preston came to visit in January, 4 months after I arrived. She was visibly pregnant by then, round and glowing in the specific way of women who are well and happy. Preston was different in Lisbon than he was in Asheville. I don't know whether it was the removal of his professional context or the fact that he was on someone else's territory, or simply that time and consequences had shifted something in him. But he was quieter, more observant, less inclined to reorganize things. He tried the pasté de nata on the first morning and said nothing for a full 30 seconds, which I recognized as the closest he came to expressing reverence. I showed them my neighborhood, my favorite streets and market stalls, and the Miradoro, where you could see the whole city spread below and the river beyond it reaching toward the sea. I took them to the Fado Club on Friday evening. Preston did not say anything about the music except that it was something else, which from him I understood to be high praise. On their last evening, we had dinner on my terrace, the 3 of us, with food from the Tuesday market and wine from a small producer in the Alentejo region, and the chess square below us quiet in the January dark. I don't think I understood, Preston said. He was looking at the lights on the river. What it meant to you. The house. I waited. I'm sorry for the way things happened, he said. He was not, I could tell, a man for whom apologies came easily. This one seemed to cost him something real. I accepted it, not because it erased anything, but because it was genuine, and because Claire was sitting beside him with her hand on her round belly and her eyes on my face, waiting to see who we would all choose to be with each other going forward. I told him that what mattered to me now was what we built from here. He nodded slowly. Then he said, For what it's worth, the family from Ohio sent Claire a letter through the realtor. They wanted her to know that their daughter wants to learn piano. They found the old upright in the basement and had it tuned. Gerald had bought that piano when Claire was 7. She hadn't played in 20 years. I had forgotten it was still there. I excused myself for a moment and stood in my kitchen until I was steady again. Then I went back out to the terrace and poured more wine, and we talked until the chess square was completely dark and the lights of the city below us glittered like a second sky. The baby was born in April, a girl. They named her Eleanor, which had been Gerald's mother's name and which I had not suggested or expected. Claire called me from the hospital room, exhausted and radiant through the small phone screen, holding a red-faced 7-pound person who would eventually become a person, and I sat on my Lisbon terrace and cried in the good way, the full chest way, the way that means your life is larger than your losses. I am still here. I teach watercolor classes now, twice a week at a small studio in the Bairro Alto run by a Portuguese woman named Inez, who told me when I first came in that I had a good eye and should stop apologizing for taking up space. I have not apologized for taking up space since. My Portuguese is no longer unintelligible, or so Inez tells me, though she is a generous woman. I have 13 tiles in a series that a gallery in the Chiado neighborhood has asked to exhibit in the fall. Dolores from back in Asheville is coming to visit in June. She said it was about time she had an adventure, which is precisely what Olivia said to me in the story I read about a woman not unlike me, in a situation not unlike mine, who discovered what I have also discovered, that the years after loss are not a diminishment. They are, if you let them be, an expansion. My daughter was wrong that this house was too big for a woman living alone. My daughter's husband was wrong that I needed somewhere more appropriate for my age. They were operating from a story about older women that our culture tells so often and so automatically that even kind people repeat it without examination. I do not blame them. I used to believe it myself. But here is what I know now. From this terrace above a chess square in Lisbon, with a terracotta pot of rosemary by the door and Gerald's photograph on the bookshelf, beside my growing collection of books in 2 languages, the story does not end when your children are grown or your husband is gone or someone who loves you imperfectly decides you are inconvenient. The story ends when you decide it ends. I am 71 years old. I paint tiles and drink wine and speak halting Portuguese to patient shopkeepers and watch the light change over the Tagus River and think about all the things I still want to do. I am just getting started. What would you have done in my place? Have you ever had to choose between keeping the peace and choosing yourself? I want to hear your story in the comments. And if this one resonated with you, there are 2 more stories right on your screen now that I think you'll love. Thank you so much for being here today.